Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 941st New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn A. Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Eric N. Mack and William Corwin. We're thrilled to welcome poet Mohammed Zenia here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Using fabric and other found objects, Eric N. Mack creates richly textured compositions that collapse the boundaries between fine art, fashion, and architecture. The artist identifies as a painter working in the medium of fabric, although his works frequently move away from the walls to synthesize painting with sculpture. He received his BFA from the Cooper Union and his MFA from Yale. He has participated in numerous residencies, solo exhibitions, and group exhibitions internationally. Our host today, sculptor and journalist William Corwin, is from New York. He has exhibited at galleries internationally, and he has written regularly for the Brooklyn Rail, Art Papers, Bomb, and others. He's the editor of Formalism, Collected Essays of Saul Ostra. Thank you all so much for joining today, and I'll turn it over to you, Will.
Thank you. So welcome, Eric. It's wonderful to talk to you. First, let me encourage everyone to go see Eric's spectacular show titled Eric Mack at the Paula Cooper Gallery. It's an extraordinary exhibition of his fabric works, and one of the first things, so I'm going to jump right in, start asking you about your work. One of the first things you notice, sort of perusing the works, wandering through the gallery, is that you use aluminum painting stretchers as a base for your works. Obviously, there's a tie here to painting, and so I guess I wanted to start by saying, what is that connection that you feel that you are creating with painting in your work?
I think, I've started off with painting, like moving to New York. My experience in undergrad, I kind of went between painting and sculpture, and was trying to find like a really important in-between space where they both could share some important qualities. So like the epiphany of using the aluminum stretchers was really kind of more of a dissociation from painting history, but like one that related more materially to architecture, and like how, thinking about more, I don't know, how buildings are structured, like more of an open field of like what aluminum kind of associates itself with, and it's exciting because it actually lends something to the experience of viewing the work, rather than kind of absorbing light or reflects light. So it's one of those things that like allows itself in relationship to light to announce its presence in a way.
It also imposes a form,
Mm-hmm.
which, I don't know, in your work you clearly are distancing yourself from that. I'm just curious, what was that first sort of epiphany moment when you realized that you were going to, unstaple the canvas from the stretcher, or whatever form that took? When did you envision that moment? How did that moment take place?
I think it was really about the way that the painting was being structured or built. I felt like, one of the things I mean, I acknowledge the painting as an object. I mean, that it's like really number one. And for that to be really present in the decision making from the beginning to the end was really important. But like its quality of kind of taking away or like concealing is not really my I'm not interested in like hiding so much of the structures that produce the image, you know. And so even in its rectangularity, it being really important that you know, there is some reveal to the support structure for most of the works, and especially with the works that like, you know, allow for more like like the fabric itself, or is able to have these peaks of either a literal cutout or just a transparent gauze over it. You know, that is a literal gesture of like creating depth, and you know, very much in a formal quality. Yeah, and I wanted that to be a part of the picture, a part of the way that the picture communicated, a part of the way that the painting communicated. You know, as a condition that the painting would go under, would be all of them are stretched on this aluminum stretcher. So yeah, it is a kind of an important hybrid.
And then in terms of kind of the classic ready-made idea, you use patterns, and the patterns, we watch the patterns kind of intersect at odd levels, which deconstructs the idea of the pattern, because then there are these alternating patterns, which obviously are not, you know, it's random, or apparently, you know, the form is random. When did you, but it's intriguing because I also noticed that in one of the paintings you have a strip of canvas that is painted, or at least is printed to look like a painted canvas. So again, but going back to your sort of the origin story, when did you realize you wanted to use fabrics and patterns as opposed to generating an imagery on a canvas in a traditional way?
I mean, I think it was about like a kind of trial and error. I mean, I felt like, you know, there were like, I feel like I went through so many phases in school in terms of spaces of art history. I mean, like going from like ABEX to this more like kind of generated pattern to activate, you know, like almost like a pointillist dot. All of these ideas were to like kind of activate the surface on a really basic level. You know, whether it was like a kind of a connection to like the Bende dot, or thinking about like an embellishment, you know, that sits on top of the surface of the canvas or the textile itself. You know, all of these things have these like corollaries in kind of in like the textile discourse, you know, textile conversation, you know, this history of this kind of like this designed kind of craft conversation that I think oddly gets like excluded for some of its use value, some of its like meaning in terms of relationships to I think domestic space, gendered space, all of these things. So I mean, I think there was a kind of acceptance and allowance that I gave myself to be able to really move forward with a lot of the more decorative aspects of the pattern, you know, and thinking about it as like a kind of repetition, or like a fragment of an all over painting, you know, or, you know, just that these were also kind of pre-existing tropes that could be literally cut and sewn, or you know, even in their collisions, like thinking about like a paisley with a plaid, like or floral with a paisley and a plaid, like that there's like distancing from gestural marks of the hand, or even depictions of floral qualities of nature, versus like kind of gridded space that maybe lends itself more to a reflection on architecture, rather than like just one aspect of like, a decorative like plaid dishcloth from like the 70s. So like there's a little bit of like haptics in the way that these things are coming together, and in that juxtaposition there is gesture, and maybe not so obviously distributed by like the work of the hand, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And that feeds perfectly into the next question, which is, when you start to investigate your works more closely, you notice certain little fashion clothing construction details, like you have the little pins with the round tops, and you have hems, and it's clearly like sort of a hemming gesture as opposed to other kinds of stitches. So I want to know what your connection to the discipline of fashion design is. What is when did that take place, or how do you negotiate that in your current practice?
I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I'm fashion has always been like kind of like invigorating, kind of I don't know, I wouldn't call it, I mean, yeah, maybe it's just an interest of mine, that I felt like sat alongside a lot of my aesthetic interests in terms of contemporary art and the ways that I experience art history. I think fashion has a lot to do with like a kind of physical memory. And there's also like a kind of vein that includes garment culture that I'm interested in. And that would include like kind of workwear, all kinds of kind of things that are, considered like non-aesthetic but practical clothing of coverage, and that kind of idea is also kind of sits alongside this idea of fashion, which is in the highest pursuit of that word, I think, is a desire for the present to become visualized and materialized in garments, and the way that people ideally could present themselves. There's some expressive technology in fashion that has always interested me. So like, I mean, I started off like as a teenager really interested in clothes, in what I was seeing. Like my dad had a clothing store as a kid, and there, at some point, like, he asked, well, we worked with him. We were just, his little workers. And some of the clothing, like in terms of like what people were wearing and what he was selling, had some interesting correspondence with like me flipping the channels on cable and like finding fashion TV or something like that, and seeing a runway show on cable, in like the late 90s, and trying to make sense of the relationship, and also seeing how those things were kind of reflected in everyday space, or like how people decide to dress themselves, like you could see was altered by this kind of fact of the runway. But also you see things in turn, like how people really live their lives, like ends up or politics of the day like really influence the way that things that you would see on the runway. So there was this like way of looking that that was challenging and interesting, and also sat alongside the exhibitions that I was thinking about, and art that I enjoyed. So I mean, yeah, there's just some memory to it that that like it's like kind of cataloged in my mind. So I imagine like that there is a way of considering or projecting like a future idea of what would be useful to wear in the next year or so, judging by kinds of research and ways that not just aesthetic trends, but how these things cycle. It's all like very, very interesting to me. So yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to pop in. Eric, I think your video got turned off, if you know.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
I'm just curious, what did your dad have you do in the shop? What was his what were his responsibilities?
I would fold things, put things back in place. Basically, at a certain point in the 90s, he had a clothing store that he just kind of made on the back of a moving truck. So it was like a very early pop-up shop. But at the same time, he was working at the National Gallery as a plexiglass specialist. So there's like these kind of dualities that immediately I was able to see, and connections that I was making that were aesthetic. They were about proximity to beauty, and also about like certain like systems of value that's like altered and from place to place. And yeah, proximity to art with a capital A. Yeah.
Now we can see in the pictures the centerpiece of the exhibition is, I mean, there are two mobiles, but I think the one two time Sly is the one that's sort of at the middle. When did you begin to sort of investigate mobiles and their use as a way of coming away from the wall? Was that simultaneously with the wall works, or was that did that grow out of it? What's the sort of the narrative there? What's the story?
I actually think I developed them. I mean, it was like kind of a problem-solving technique, and I actually basically like just structuring the painting from like wooden dowels that I crossed in order to create form, to create like a kind of volume that you could see in around that would like multiply the ways that the fabric could be draped, and in some ways like have a kind of anthropomorphic like span, like the drape of a cape or something, or just large flounce, like things that there's also like ways that I've experienced fabric to drape that ends up being like kind of collected as a like kind of a wider index or a wider language of what I know fabric can do, or how I could allow for the fabric to be itself, but also present with a kind of gravity, and again like a kind of gestural movement that's real, and but not like bound by my own hand. I mean, like I remember when I was at Cooper, I was making work that used string or like shoelaces as a line, and it would weave in and out of the canvas in order to like kind of allow the viewer to like perceive the other side of the canvas, but that one could understand like by the movement of the line that how the composition was structured by this very real object, this very real string, you know. So there's threads of that in this work, but kind of made much larger and much more complex, I think. You know, and it kind of, and I appreciate how it's able to address a very my own kind of painting heritage and experience with that as the medium, but also like leave it at a moment. I mean, I think the structure of the show begins with the work that's not stretched at all, but just like kind of tacked onto the wall ever so gently.
Is that the one by the front desk?
Yeah, it's called Free Freely. Free Freely. Three frees. It's probably at the end.
There it is. There we go.
Yeah. And I mean, basically these you know, these are fragments that have been pieced together, sewn together over some period of time. You know, and there's like this like fuchsia kind of bleached silk chiffon, and the bleach is eating away at the fibers of the work, but I mean it's completely planned. So there is this like kind of organic cutout that happens in that like kind of triangulation of that piece. And then that being paired with this like floral, this iris, like this irregular grid of irises, you know, and just like kind of framed by this color that sits to the right of this scarf. So, you know, I think the scarf is important in relationship to the ready-made and relationship to garment culture. And it is like in a way like a surrogate for a active painting, a painted object. And, you know, and also thinking about like standardization, like the standard scale of a scarf, you know, is just so for it to relate to a body in a number of ways, you know, to wrap around the neck, to wrap around, you know, the wrist or whatever, as a kind of physical like form of embellishment, or memory, or it could be, you know, gotta blow your nose, I don't know.
Did you submerge the fuchsia piece in bleach in order to get that cobweb quality?
No.
No, you sort of, but you can
Oh,
tell
sorry.
that.
Yeah, it in part, yeah, there are parts that it's been submerged in bleach, and just simply because of the weight of that fabric, it couldn't be supported any longer. Like it just kind of fell away. But the same process is done to this work called Adrift. That's the yellow plaid work that's in the show. Yeah, and because of the weight of the fabric, it's able to hold up and become a very opaque kind of painted gesture, like in painting within the surface of the given textile.
I think you've commented in the past that the choosing of fabrics is sort of a very careful, deliberate process. Can you sort of walk us through how you source the fabrics, how you find them, how you choose them, you know, and then obviously from there you pair them, you decide how to drape them. But what is that process?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, yeah, I think there are like kind of classifications where again, like thinking about the floral in relationship to nature and the depiction of like the outdoors, this kind of, I mean, there's so many kind of pre-existing kind of poetics around flowers and that are like kind of turned into a motif. So yeah, there's aspects of that I look for. I'm always looking for things that do multiple jobs, that like bring up multiple kind of points of memory or truths. Yeah, and so like, I don't know, thinking about the grid and the plaid, those things like being able to work together and also are like kind of materials that I collect. I mean, I think it is really visceral, like what like kind of draws my attention, draws my eye, almost like I mean, as I'm going to a shop to see all these different selections, like what I end up selecting has to do with, a certain kind of like saturation of color or but I mean often I end up going to shops to kind of fill in a kind of void or like allowing for them to be more of a harmony in some of the juxtapositions of the fabric. So that's like Mood Fabrics, is like the famous fabric shop in the garment district, but it ends up being I go there more than I go to the the art store. Like it's really important, I think, to find materials that are like a little bit more of the world than so yeah, I mean there's interesting variation that like I kind of go out to find rather than in the studio kind of hermetically like trying to make something or produce a color from paint. Yeah, so the challenge is to be able to find something that I didn't know I was gonna come to, like a interesting outlier. It ends up being the rupture to the grid, and sometimes that like exists in real time, the outlier, and so you can't say that the work is from one place or another place because it's expressly from kind of collecting a group of outliers together in a way.
Are the works ever are the pieces ever autobiographical? Like, are there things that you have worn or family members have worn? Is there any kind of embedding that kind of a history into the works, or is it purely collecting the fabric and putting it into the picture, onto the stretcher or onto the mobile?
I wouldn't say the work is autobiographical, like in a normal sense of that. But I would say, I mean, there's definitely, a part of, I think a part of the use of fabric in my own everyday, there's times with like garments, like old coats or things, things that I've actually really worn, like, jeans, denim jeans, that the wear ends up being a mark or a gesture that I bring to the studio for sure, and it would sit alongside. I think it would be interesting for it to sit alongside like a ready-made store-bought like piece of silk, and I think there's some interesting radicality to to that, like adding depth to what those fabrics meant separately. So yeah, there's some interesting juxtapositions that are really important
Hmm.
in the studio and in the work, as it would show up in the work as well.
Yeah, and in terms of juxtaposition, I mean, as everyone watching can see, the structure is very intensely designed. You can see the hooks go into other hooks. There's a lot of referencing there, I think, of clothes hangers, and also a nod, I think, to Calder, people like that. But then the actual drapery of the fabric is incredibly spontaneous. So, I mean, on the one hand, this is a two-part. The first question is, just as a practical matter, how do you keep how do you keep the works in place? How do you keep the fabrics in place? How do you ensure that when it travels, it's reproduced exactly? Does the artist's hand have to be engaged every time the work is installed? I mean, I was sort of fascinated by that because it is such a light touch. There's some fabrics that are just sort of placed, and you can't tell if they're gonna fly away if you blow on them or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that so literally, like there's a kind of adhesive that I use basically. And it's great because it doesn't look like it's there. I appreciate that in the sense that it is able, the fabric is able to just sign as it is and relate to the structure as it is, and both of those materials can communicate as they do. But I think I think that there's aspect of the work that really, because they are, there's like something about the ready-made aspect of it, like I think it's a kind of a shared, there's shared information there. There's a shared kind of witness of the work, especially it being as it is. I think I want it to be able to produce a kind of care for a kind of stewardship. I mean, I think that these are things that I feel like basically, especially with the work previous, I think it's the way that it is challenging, the way it is radical, it has to do with the breadth and the ease of the way that the work appears. I mean, the structure of the work, it's made from drawings that I made, and really it's meant to like occupy the viewer's space. And I'm so happy that they're absolutely not contingent on wall space at all, so they can really inhabit and in some cases like kind of mimic the stature of a figure, simply by the way that the fabric is draped. And it also is not trying to be too fussy, in this way that talks too much about like costume or dress. It is like it should be approachable and accessible on that front, in terms of its material language. But yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about how the work can produce care and from the viewer, and what kind of how the work can reframe the space that it's in, and that has to do with breaking the frame of the rectangle, and allowing for the fabric to continue.
Well, that's part two. The part two of the question was, between the stretchers and the mobiles, there in this sort of space of fashion, there's the idea of the mannequin and the body. So, and you know, and now that you've mentioned that you sort of have worked, you know, in a clothing shop, I don't know if there were mannequins, but what is your relationship with that? What is that? That's sort of the stretcher of the fashion world is the mannequin. So what?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have a mannequin in the studio. I mean, I don't know. I'm obsessed with thinking about like Isagensk and the mannequins that Isagensk is made into sculptures. Um, I mean, I think it's an interesting idea in relationship to like really stabilizing the garment's relationship to the body, or a projected relationship to the body. I mean, there's I would like to I'm interested in like, again, like structuring the textiles or a garment that's made relate to the body in a actual way, like to a real living person. Like you know, just thinking about there's a show that I did at Jeffrey Stark Gallery where basically from like dyed fabric, I basically took kind of studio items and created like a painting from the dye onto this bolt of fabric that I then sent to a tailor who turned this bolt of fabric into button-down shirts. And so I was thinking about like how I'm affecting this ready-made is anticipating the body in a specific way. And there's in that sense, it's I don't know, maybe yeah. I'm not going to say like that I'm the mannequin or, you know, the test subject for this, but I think the body and like the viewers' bodies could be sites for this kind of material empathy and experience of painting. You know, even in just thinking about how the recognition of some of these fabrics, you know, like they are like people know what they feel like by looking at them because they have their own experience of them, I think, for the most part. Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about, yeah, I don't know. I like the idea of the mannequin as a model or something, or as like a concept model or something. Like maybe the mobile is a mannequin in a way, you know, as a kind of idealized site for this draping fabric, you know, in the round. But it maybe doesn't obviously question of a human body in the same way a mannequin does. But it allows for like a kind of structuring for dimensionality in real time, and makes for, you know, experience of seeing movement, you know, happen from the work as a whole. So,
And as you said, there are correlations. I mean, in the smaller one in the exhibition, you can see that it's sort of the height of a person, and so it does have a figurative quality to it. I wanted to talk about the preparatory process for these. You mentioned doing drawings. I mean, again, going back to the spontaneity of the works, how do you prepare these
Um,
or prepare for them?
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it does like come from like experiences just with the fabric and starting like it kind of minds improvisation and is grounded as like a tool later on that shows up like knowing how fabric could be manipulated, just like thinking about the simple weave that becomes this visual motif, and it changes from one to the other like a checkerboard. But I think so there's that repetition. So I mean, there's a way that I like understand what's being produced from that, just and there are just variations that end up showing up compositionally, I think. Um, I mean that there's also the Desert X project that I did in 2019, and that also was structured by like some works that I made for a space where the fabric the textile, like the fabric collage itself extended out into a canopy, so I could take part of that and like see if it could exist on a smaller scale and a more intimate scale, or blow it up to see if it could scale up to like basically structure the gas station. And there were imperfect kind of ideas about that, or there's varied points of execution with that, ways that the fabric need to be sewn in order for that to be translated. But it really is like a kind of a starting point. I mean, I think to go back to drawing is really, I think, is an important thing, because it deals so much with the picture, and like scale can be varied. So yeah, I mean, like the Palazzo Grassi was a pretty rigorous plan in which I like worked with the architect to kind of have from the drawings, like renderings were made in order for people to really understand what they're going to be looking at, what the scale needed to be, in order to really address the atrium in a full way. Yeah, and yeah.
Well, so getting to this extraordinary project, which is on view now at the Palazzo Grassi in Venice, you've taken over the sort of the courtyard, and throughout this talk, you've brought up architecture and an interest in architecture. So this is clearly a moment to engage with sort of Venetian classical architecture from the mid-18th century. As you said, you had to create working drawings in order for it to be sort of fabricated. How were you presented with this, where you said you have the courtyard, make something? It's called Sarong, and just tell us the story of this sort of magnificent piece.
Yeah, so it's an interesting project, because it started off with, so that it's like within the Palazzo Grassi, there's kind of it's a two-part exhibition. The first part is Chronorama, which is like a photography exhibition using the Condé Nast archive. So it's a lot of fashion photography. It's a lot of it begins with like the first decade that Vogue was made, and that decade was all basically fashion illustrations. And then each room after that, like each room was curated to be a different decade, starting from like I think 1910 to 1970. So some of my previous work having used like literal photographs, as like a collage, as collage material. I was kind of offered this opportunity to work in the atrium of the Palazzo Grassi and create something dynamic and that can be seen from all of these different angles of the museum. And I decided to not use the photographs at all, but to take notes from what I was seeing in the photographs, like how the fabric was like kind of manipulated in like a old in a Balenciaga, like an early Balenciaga photograph, and then like there's some really beautiful just images, having very rich fabrics and patterns and things that really spoke about a very specific time. So I wanted that there to be notations of that in each fabric, but they kind of image like a really different dynamic like array of color and texture that my work is known for, and also just visibly deal with, like, intervene in the compositional space of the atrium. So like, how do you start a painting? How do you begin a painting? But imagining that painting being something dimensional imagining those brushstrokes being something dimensional that you end up walking under, it's material. So like there was this idea that there would be a mobile in the center just to really deal with the center of the space. But then there's also this kind of swooping hammock that like creates this kind of gravity and like a pocket below. But I really like this idea that just the weight of it could be like seen. It's a little bit of like a hyperbolic kind of rendering of like the weight of the fabric, having it like droop in that way. But I like the idea that the hammock is just a couple yards of fabric, that is like tied to one wall to the next, and is able to like kind of cocoon the body, to envelop the body, to contain the body. And so that ends up being a kind of conceit. The title Sarong, is again like this, like thinking about like wrapping one's waist with a textile becomes a garment, and this kind of structure is a very like kind of non-Western kind of garment, and so really thinking about like how the physicality of the textile, kind of marks the waist of the body. So really like kind of enacting that, but for the architecture in a way. Yeah, it's absolutely in the round. And so this is like under it looking up. Yeah, and so like there's basically one of the important aspects of like early on with the proposal was that I would go to places that I haven't been, to look for fabrics, and I really wanted like a kind of dead stock, you know, a dead stock kind of floral, or a kind of like plaid, to work from. And so I went to Paris and like went through a lot of like fabric shops in the north, and then I ended up going to Milan and like went around to like some familiar fabric shops that I bought things from, but I needed like so much more yardage than that. So we found a place called Meba in outside of Venice, or in the Veneto region, and they work with like on a recycled material, and they log them so they can be reused. And there were a lot of high fashion fabrics, and so most of the fabric from the hammock work is actually Bottega Veneta, which I thought was a funny literalism, because it's from there. It ends up Veneto, and yeah, it's from the region of Venice. So that felt like a really good grounding point materially, to operate on multiple levels. Yeah.
How much time did you spend either reacting against or embracing the kind of rigid regularity of the classical architecture, that sort of peach color that it has, those floors? What were, how much time did you spend absorbing that and saying, this is what I have to react against, this is what I have to do?
This was like a very site responsive piece. So I was there. I think my first trip was January. And basically I worked in that atrium. So I worked with this great seamstress, tailor named Anthony Knight. And we had maybe three sewing machines in the atrium of the Palazzo Grassi, and it just operated as much as it could as the studio. And yeah, so but yeah, there were a lot of like challenges with that, because I literally couldn't go up and touch the work because of kind of restrictions and things like that. But I mean, I couldn't like physically install it like I would usually do. Like I would usually be on like a cherry picker up there, like, doing the finishing touches, but I literally couldn't do that and had to be able to describe what I needed to be done to the people whose job it is to install the work at Palazzo Grassi. So, it was a real challenge. But yeah, I mean, it just adds to the it just adds to the depth of the work, I think.
Mm-hmm. The last question: you've been paired up with Linda Benglis in exhibitions. Very different approach to fabric, I think, but I think there are obviously correlations there. Christo and Jean-Claude, Sam Gilliam, who are I mean, it doesn't have to be fabric artists. Who are the artists who you kind of look to, that you feel a connection to, maybe that you read, that you think about? Fashion designers, what's
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I love research. I love to do the research. So, I mean, like more recently, I mean, I think about Richard Tuttle a lot. I think about Rauschenberg, of course. I've had to like really contend with him. But Issa Genskin is a hero. Neri Bagramian, I think about her work a lot. the way she like tends to space and how the objects affect that. Wolfgang Tillmans, Lyle Ashton Harris, Ellen Atsui. Yeah, but in fashion, it's like Miuccia Prada, John Galliano, Raf Simons. Yeah, I've really very lucky to have a community of artists and fashion folk that, have supported my work, and I support their work in turn. There's Kiko Konstantinov, and he's a great designer, alongside his women's wear collaborators, Laura and Deanna Fanning, and Grace Wells Bonner, who I've collaborated with on some shows back in 2018, including her exhibition at the Serpentine. I like to think about, I love Martine Rose a lot, and I think a lot about stylists and the way that the kind of unseen hand of that it takes to produce a kind of image like a fashion show. And I have great artist friends like Troy Jean Mitchie and Abigail DeVille and Candace Williams, so that's kind of like, and Tamashi Jackson, there's a number of shout outs, and people that in turn inspire me. So
Fascinating. So everyone go see Eric's show at Paul Cooper, which is on now. And if you're lucky enough to get to Venice, go to the Palazzo Grassi and see the fantastic installation there. I guess we will open it up to questions now.
Great. Thank you both so much for this conversation today. Our first question is going to be from Chloe, our programs director.
Hi, William. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for that dialogue. I enjoyed listening to it the whole time. Eric, I just wondered, you spoke on it a bit in a case-by-case way, but I'm curious how titling for your works goes. When do you think of the titles? At the end or at the beginning or throughout?
I think I'm on, it depends on the piece, really. At least at the end, I have to really make some decisions, but I usually have kind of notations while I'm making the work. And then I usually throw them out because the work kind of grows in a way, or it ends up being maybe a little bit too direct. Like, I like the titles to be either like on that it sits alongside what you're seeing and kind of aids the viewing of the work itself, and or it's like language that you can't possibly know, that can be applied to this work. And so, there's a space for the work, the object, to absorb the language. So I sometimes it congeals and it's great, and I can't imagine the title without it, without that work, or the work without that title. And other times I wish that I changed it. So
I love that. Thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you both. The next question is from Lorenzo, and I'm going to ask on their behalf. Lorenzo asks, I note that Eric's use of metal is a relatively recent pivot away from previously freestanding textile assemblages, wherein the textile itself becomes architecture. I wonder how he characterizes this shift, which feels like a return to the stretcher or support after making paintings that had been freed from it.
Yeah, I think there's a good challenge, I think, in that I wanted to like open up the opportunities for the work to be displayed in kind of wider architectural spaces, or like gallery spaces, like, you know, rather than having all of these like precarious specific hanging conditions. There could just be one, and that it wouldn't, that the relationship to the site doesn't have to be so much of a constriction of it, like, to that. And, you know, like it just is like a translation where like the ropes that would like pull the work taut don't have to be there anymore. It ends up being able to drape and lay and use the bars as a finite, rigid source of structure for the work. So yeah, I feel like it challenges and multiplies, I think the opportunities for the work to be seen and presented.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Lorenzo. I have one that I'm sort of having trouble formulating a bit, but I mean, it's hard not to feel so much pleasure and desire when looking at your work. And of course, like the idea of the commodities, you know, you're bringing up and you're speaking to, and it's just kind of reframing beauty in a big way for me, like almost as a kind of position. And I'd just be curious to hear you speak a little bit more about any of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I'm just thinking about like how, I mean, okay, there's a lot of ways that I would want to address this, and I feel like there's a base point where I want people to be able to talk about beauty and how they experience it like kind of outside the trappings of, or outside the kind of expectations or allotted language of art history, which is why I think fashion or like garment culture is so important to like kind of bring in, just so people can be able to talk about even things that they like or things that they don't like or things that they're familiar with, you know, just that the work can be allowed to be a bit of a reflective tool. I think that is an important thing. I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about like there's like important pivots, I think, in the work that are kind of simultaneously there with the beauty and the pleasure, and thinking about like the desire there, like really like maybe wanting to be enveloped by it, you know. And but I think that there's aspects of kind of brutality and like impersonal aspects of it, like that I think are really important to like really, that radicalize some of the softness of the work. Because, you know, these structures, I mean, I've drawn them, I've anticipated their identity. So like some of the force behind the metal maybe could feel like it completely outweighs or could destroy the delicate nature of the fabric. But I think that the fact that they are able to exist in that way, the truth of that like really is able to communicate like some of the kind of simultaneous the harshness, the perceived destruction of the fabric with the bleach, or just like being able to interpret like what's taking place like with this fabric. It's no longer whole in the way that it once was, and something's been enacted on it that has like taken away from its identity or its material form. So yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, somebody wrote something about like material tension. I think that there is like this like varied this interesting balance that is so important. And and I feel like that there's real poetics there. And it's real, it's real, it's in a sense of what we experience. Like those metal structures could be continuous with like the surface of a subway pole, and placing some fabric that could be seen as like sentimental or like inferring, or like a subject that is more fragile. Like those juxtapositions are really important ones to perceive, like both the hardness and the softness, so.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for that answer. And our final question today will be from GE, and you can unmute, GE. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and thank you, William and Eric. Thank you so much. Listening in today, I kept thinking about aleatoric music or chance music. Because I often go to those parallel things, and in which some element of the composition is left to chance, of course. Are there any kind of parallels to your making to be found in this kind of thought?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I feel like the element of improvisation ends up being a space of experiment, in which something is developed that then is allowed to become more concrete by like it's replaying, it's rehearsing, it's reciting, so the rupture becomes structural in a way and holds, or it's really understood the kind of resonance from that rupture, the weight of that rupture. Yeah, so I'm definitely interested in that as a motif, and it ends up, it just is definitely a big part of the practice, but one that's like very much measured and orchestrated within it, and it doesn't stop in the studio. It kind of ends up being something that is a problem solving device as well, yeah, so yeah.
Thank you, because I was seeing choreography too, so very much so, absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely use that language as well, like just thinking about the movement off the wall, just like that those that energy is still there, and but like in order to see like the proximity from the center of the room, there's how it extends there, how it gets there, you know, and it really gives a lot of weight to the line, you know, how the line ends up being this extension off the wall, or the movement off the wall. Yeah. So yeah, choreographed. Yeah, or like even like the fabric being fulfilling a prompt, you know. So yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, GE. One more just came in the chat, which you kind of discussed, but it's from Layla. How do you transform the perspective of your 3D installation into 2D pieces? I mean, the shift from hanging pieces to the paintings on the wall, I guess, in more that direction she's asking about.
To go back to the paintings on the wall, how do the
Yeah, I'm they're right. I mean, the shift from the hanging pieces to the paintings on the wall.
I mean, I think they both come from the wall. Yeah, I think they both come from the wall. Just thinking about, I don't know, I think a lot of the wall pieces in this show like are kind of about compression, like a kind of compressed space where some of the variations that would maybe have the desire to be spatial, you know, have to deal with themselves like in this pictorial way. So yeah, I mean, there's some interesting restraint there. But yeah, I mean, I'm just really pleased that I'd like to feel like, because of the ways that the work deals with the space, like the mobiles like deal with the space, that the paintings can exist as, you know, as their own kind of, they're not seeking to be more radical than they are, you know. They can be their own fact, and that is a real, I think, a success of, you know, of that body of work. I think, you know, for everything to be able to operate with the understanding of what it is and not this desire to be something else, like you know, for the structure of the mobiles to really be be as it is. So
Thank you. And thank you, Layla. I see you there for that question. And thank you again for this dialogue today. It's just been amazing. So here at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm so very thrilled to welcome our poet of the day, Mohammed Zenia, here to the stage. Sudanese Eritrean poet Mohammed Zenia is working through the mediums of text, visual symbols, and sound to explore issues of language and the ever-changing meaning of words, identity and place, gender, sexuality, and love through a Black diasporic lens. They are the author of the chapbook Barroom Seance and An Asterisk is a Mixtape. Thank you, Mohammed, so much for being here today. Mohammed's camera isn't working, but we'll get to hear from them regardless.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful talk. Thank you for inviting me. I think with poetry, it's very incumbent on us to speak in times of a disaster as well as times of hope. Kind of in that vein, this is a poem I wrote about the genocide in Khartoum and the genocide in Gaza and Palestine. It's called Gaza to Khartoum in the World-born Detroit. Birdsong drifts over modern earth, but this is more than murder. They are trying to name the dead, whole litanies of olive bloodline stuffed teeth Moloch. Cadillac future moves its carry-on cannon, like famous fathers of death before them. An air raid sentence rumbles the Pentagon, but no body tinge burns will bear the silent tectonic plates no longer. Maybe this does mean war. But altogether, I think we may be on opposite sides of the equation. Crossover golfer has long been buried, maimed, or homeless, and the stench of this evil traces its first step, lost colonies nestled island, desert Virginia, burials at sea. But the kids of Comerica will still bolster their stones, no surprise who is who. Clearly, this has always been here. Too many for too long have in vain explained, and some even wrote. Toussaint, Nat Turner, Layla Khalid, John Brown, Tubman, Joseph Garang, to name but so many few. Jihadists for the word. After kingdom walls fell, serpent struck Jericho, fucked Babel. Today we stand shoulder to shoulder in the trenches of resistance. October 7th, communique from the Sudanese Communist Party trapped in the bombed out suburbs of Omdurman. From Shendai to Jerusalem echoes the prophecy that this world will burn its shell to make way anew. Elijah has fled to Chad on the back of a Toyota, and the Holy Lands have fallen into the hands of the Romans once again. From Al-Aqsa to Mosul, we avenge the ruins, but inshallah, there will be birds born free over Gaza once more, and no slight can unravel this fundamental truth. The earth may never yield its burns, the cosmos maintain its mysterious silence, a long march to exile repeated over and over to the soundtrack of triumph of the will. And if the death camp is the only future, then serenely we will engage the endless intifada to face this future of war. But climate change's empires, indigenous struggle, and Fanape to Palestine to San Juan to the Nile Basin, back to Patagonia and Bay Ridge outside the Hemos, you could smell the sage. Diana de Prima once wrote about how it feels to be up to your eyeballs, revolution, love spelled backwards. And I couldn't help but cry, because it really is that. For a free Palestine, a free Sudan, land back America to Australia, shout out Wahane. The Philippines and Guam will see the sun. Thailand to Nepal beam without the yoke. Planet Arab rise love, the true unification of the Habesha nation, from Swahili to the 5 stars of Somalia, Yemen breed birth. Borderless Africa, drum spread the healing, earth without sadness. All conferred confederacy tribes once and will again hold garden past, present, future, till it's backward, free Palestine from the river to the free sea, Palestine free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, for that reading. Really, thank you for joining us. And thank you, Eric and William, so much for the conversation today. Thank you to Paula Cooper Gallery for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, for their support of our growing archive. Today's conversation has been recorded, and you can view it on our YouTube channel shortly. For the past 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a poetry reading with Tony Tal and Annabelle Lee. And as is tradition, you can now turn your microphones on and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, William. Thank
Great
you, everybody.
discussion
That
and
was so
reading.
lovely.
All
And
of it
go
was
see
great.
this show, please.
Will.
Go see this show.
Thank you for your reading,
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.